Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the I'm Telling God About This podcast. Today, we are talking about old arguments in an exploding and growing Christian community. It's no surprise to many of us that current changes, and at least in the U.S., in the political realm have resulted in changes to major organizations, specifically like schools, government organizations, specifically in the area of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And some of you, if you're new to the faith, or maybe if you haven't been involved in church politics, may not know that this is always and has been a big debate, especially in the American church, for a very long time. But even beyond that, in missiology and in cross-cultural missions and whatnot, and there was a article that we found that was speaking about the way that the SBC had retooled, or one of the seminaries,
Southeastern Seminary.
Yeah, Southeastern Seminary had retooled their their formal DEI policy into something with a more theological spin to it. And there's debate on both sides of this issue. Like, is this an attempt to get after what's good about the concept of diversity in the church? Clearly, God loves all of humanity. We're all created in the image and likeness of God. Diversity is a good thing in that context, versus what role that plays in localized institutions and how that could potentially go awry. And so we were having a discussion about this, and Tim found some really great stuff on that he'll get into, but that's what we're looking at today. So we can crack open this article, take a look at what it is, and then go from there.
So this is the looks like what you said, Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary.
Yeah.
And
good
so
university.
They had this section on here with Revelation 7:9, specifically the context. Revelation 7:9 says, "After this I looked, and there was a vast multitude from every nation, tribe, people, and language, which no one could number, standing before the throne, before the Lamb. They were robed in white palm branches in their hands." Basically, they all cried out in one voice, right? And I think that that obviously that is the vision of what the universal church is. It comes from all kinds of different peoples,
Right.
nations, and tongues.
God has reclaimed all peoples as belonging to himself. He can redeem them all. He is,
contrary to what some people
us to go and get them all.
Contrary to what some people might think, coming from a group of 4 white dudes who are Protestant theologians, we do believe that the gospel is for all people at all times.
It's almost like they look at that passage and say that every microcosm, every church is supposed to look like every nation in tongue.
Right.
And it seems to be that's what is happening with their initiative for their sponsorships, for their scholarships and stuff, and doctoral programs.
So,
they go over.
Tell them what they're looking at, Josh, if they can't hear.
So I'm looking at the kind of like what is Revelation Missions Initiative. What they want to do is who's eligible for the Revelation 7:9 mission.
These are, I believe, scholarship awards, basically, for
students I think it's
at the seminary, awarded based on
the parameters are.
I don't know how else to say it.
Students must be students must be an.
Hold on, Josh.
Sorry, let me just read it real quick, just a little bit of it for the people on podcast. Students must be an undergraduate culture or a woman in a doctoral program. Students of African descent, Asian descent, Hispanic or Latin descent, Native American descent, Middle Eastern descent, things like that. But specifically, really, what it's saying is, as long as you're not white
was there
and
a
a
racial
male
group they didn't list there?
You don't get scholarships, which is what we're definitely have seen across the country.
So it's easy to see.
Nick.
Oh, go ahead, Nick. Yeah.
Oh, I was going to ask what is this thing that we're talking about? This is some form of scholarship for Southeast that they're giving free dollars to students who are not white. And you're saying they previously had some kind of DEI program and they are retooling this as a way to keep a similar
looks to me like they're
scholarship
trying to cloak
program.
it in religious liberty so that they can continue doing the DEI stuff they wanted to do that is now considered largely illegal in many manifestations because it is explicit racial discrimination.
And
that's what it looks like.
Yes.
So in other colleges, the other colleges are no longer allowed
Oh,
to
it was a
offer
huge, so yeah, Supreme
scholarships.
Court with Harvard or was it Harvard and Yale or one or the other?
Got
But
it.
anyway,
Right.
they basically said, yeah, you are explicitly weighting race to let people. No, and that was just an admissions.
That was an
wasn't even
admissions, right?
scholarships.
And considering,
And so, yeah.
no, I was just going to say, like, so considering the notion that it's no surprise, like Southeastern is a conservative Baptist seminary. It's like one of the big ones, right? So as you can imagine, a lot of the pushback that we've seen across our country and in a lot of our social areas against this notion, you know, the against DEI policies to some respect, yeah, they're largely coming from a conservative view of, and I mean this conservative politically conservative view of like meritocracy, right? Like people should be allowed to, you know, who do the best should promote and have advantages to these things, right? And so what being charitable, right? Again, looking at both sides of this, what it seems like, you know, they're taking the Christian perspective of like, hey, we're an institution. We, as a Christian institution, we're incentivized to train. We're commanded like to train, to equip, so that the gospel can go out to all the nations. And so the question becomes, what's really going on here, right? Is that
And I don't
really
have a
what this
problem-
is, or is it just mass DEI?
Right, because I don't have a problem with them doing the scholarships as such. More so, it's that they are using a cloak of cherry-picked verses to justify pursuing diversity as their priority. Whereas if I were to try to write this as a biblical policy, I would say, look, we're accepting applicants who are intending to go into church planting ministry in areas and cultures where there is not currently much ministry or missions going on, right? And if you were truly evangelically centered, that would be sufficient criteria. And the fact is, a lot of those groups that they listed would qualify
They'd
at
be
higher
prime.
rates than just suburban America.
Yeah.
That's true. And that would be a perfectly legitimate criteria on which to base that. But that's not what they're doing. And you can tell because it's like, okay, well, you're telling me if I've got a white person in a really unchurched area of the Southwest that he doesn't qualify just on the basis that he's white and the area he's in is more white or whatever it is, like that by itself is what makes it look to me like it's not really doing what it's claiming to do. And so what it's saying is, hey, you know, Jesus gave us the Great Commission to make disciples of all nations. And then, yeah, you've got the kind of that notion repeated from the other side.
These ones especially.
Right.
Right. And the idea is, okay, well then, rather than pursuing the gospel first and having all of the trappings of the full array of humanity, God demonstrating his willingness and capacity to save everyone shown there, we're just going to pursue that first so we can get the potpourri. And so it was actually my dad who was telling me a while back when we were talking about some of this stuff about a guy named Donald McGavran who did missionary work in India. And he popularized and is largely credited with the homogeneous unit principle, which was sort of a practical approach to missions. And this is where you get away from this idea that this is about race, because he was looking at Indian churches, and most people in India are
Indian.
You know, Indian. Yeah. And the
What
issue
kind
was
of
you would
Indian?
have that's actually the question though, because he was
daughter
saying,
feather.
you would,
We should cut that
You
out.
said it.
Gotta cut
You
that
said
one.
it. I thought it. You said it. I demonstrated self-control, and you, the very last person I expected to say that, it came out of from my brain, from your mouth.
We'll have to cut that one.
I don't know if we will.
I'm telling God about that.
Oh, that's, all right, now we have to keep it.
All
Now
right.
it stays.
Oh my
Hold on,
God.
Tim.
No.
I want you to keep going with the
Because
homogeneous unit principle. I want to, I want to add just a little bit of context. I think for the direction we're heading, which is the question here is this: is
I really do want to hear what you have to say. I promise.
I
It
do.
just-
The
It slipped out.
diversity.
Too tempting.
Diversity is good and homogeny is good. And the question is, when and where and how are these two very valuable concepts that are taught in across the board throughout Scripture that there is something about holiness and righteousness and, you know, being salt and light, being a culture unto ourselves as Christians versus being like the world. So there are all these attributes of this, and the homogeneous unit principle. You want to like how does that get after this? You know, how does that author kind of frame that?
Right. And so the problem that he was trying to address is that he kind of refers to the worldly culture as a mosaic, right? It's one whole thing, but with discrete pieces within it. And he said the Christian faith flows well within each piece of the mosaic, but tends to stop at linguistic and ethnic barriers. Most congregations are shut up to one language, one ethnic unit, and frequently to one social or economic class. That's true basically everywhere. And most people will agree that that's some kind of a problem, but why it's a problem, they differ on. So your more modern progressive stripes will say that's a problem strictly on the basis that it doesn't reflect diversity within the local church. McGavran says the reason it's a problem is because those churches are struggling to grow into areas where people are unsaved because of that, you know, the fact that there are cultural barriers that make it difficult. And it's not because those churches are unwilling to evangelize or they kick people who aren't like them culturally or economically out. It's because people aren't usually comfortable going into a group that is very, very different from them, for the same reason that, like, I have a lot theologically in common with Korean Baptist churches. Okay, like you would not really be able to find a lot of daylight between me and them on doctrinal issues. I know for a fact that I wouldn't choose a church like that to go to, even if it was an English speaking, you know, version of that, just because culturally and the way they do things is not going to be something I would be really all that comfortable in. And there would be a lot of other social and cultural barriers that would make it more difficult for me to integrate deeply into it. And so you'll see the idea is then you solve this problem by acknowledging people's preferences, and you don't create additional barriers to people coming to Christ by requiring that they adopt multiculturalism from the outset. And so he said it more succinctly than I did. Even if they were to believe in Jesus Christ and be welcomed into that congregation, he's talking about new people, converts from other ethnic units would rarely feel at home. Those who come for one service ordinarily do not return next Sunday. If they join the church, they more often than not drop after a few months. And this was his real experience in churches that just didn't grow on the mission field.
So and Josh, I know you guys, I think this is really important because that is a very real thing. And there is a tension here, and I feel this as a pastor, between raging against the reality of like consumer Christianity and comfort versus spiritual growth and development, right? But the reality is that sometimes we might be creating conflict where it doesn't necessarily need to be. And in that, and not using it in the other way. So in other words, what I mean by this is, like, I'll give you an example. You know, my dad, when he was at Southeastern Seminary, all right, he pastored a Korean church in Fayetteville, North Carolina as the English service pastor and did youth. Why?
Your dad attended Southeastern?
He did. Yep. That's where he got his MDiv.
He didn't get a scholarship, though.
Not for that. He did the ISC scholarship. It was different because he went to another country. That's neither here nor there. Should get him on this for this. But
of Southeastern for a while.
But no. Oh, that's a good point. No, the thing that happened, though, with this Korean church was interesting, though, is this is a perfect example of this. So you have soldiers in Fort Bragg getting stationed in Korea and marrying Koreans who were very devout Christians. And then they come back to the U.S., they have children. The children speak some Korean in cases, some cases not at all. The husbands don't speak Korean or didn't learn Korean, right? And so there's a Korean church there. And so, you know, in order to have representation, to meet the needs of the spiritual development and growth of that community, which was very, you know, fragmented you have a deeply homogenous Korean community with a very American military community, and you need someone to fill the gap there so that these families can worship collectively together, right? So they bring in a white guy to, an American who can resonate with the dads, who's a former soldier. He was before he was a chaplain, as a former aviator who strides the gap. And that's cross-cultural ministry. And that is valuable. That is exactly what we're getting at. But the notion that we would say, to your point, like that I would bring in somebody who is completely culturally disconnected from one community and maybe bring them in as a pastor or transplant them into that spot, hey, if you don't have a choice, then maybe God's calling you to grow in that capacity. You know what I'm saying? Like but the idea that we would shoehorn or force something where there's not a demand signal or there isn't a deliberate need for growth in that capacity, I don't see the value in that.
Sorry, Anderson, you had something.
No, I was just going to mention, based on that point, what they've justified this scholarship be for is that it provides additional funding for minority students who are going on their first mission trip, is what they say. But I think that that's a terrible justification, because if you're going on a mission, is it a long-term mission trip? Is it a short-term mission trip? And check back at some of our previous episodes about short-term mission trip. It seems very thrown in there. It's shoehorned in to say, well, this is our justification.
And I think I really avoid the fact that the diversity is their chief goal. And everything else is just
it's virtue signaling
for why.
That's it.
And I would, and where I would say that I think we're along the lines of what Tim was saying is like, man, if the Southeastern is starting an initiative to plant churches in these areas, and they're raising up pastors from those countries, not Americans going there, but from those countries, that's great, because we want to spread the gospel. That is going into the world and preaching the gospel to all nations. But to the other point that you guys were making, to the value there of when you have, and I think that this is something that is often cited by missionaries, where when you try to force things together that don't naturally fit with immature Christians, it doesn't last. And also at the same time,
even if it does, it will only last because you forged a microculture within the church that is now not capable of reaching basically anybody, because nobody else shares that. And that's another thing that is expressly acknowledged in the
looking at you, Roman Catholics,
and in his book. Right.
So can I play devil's advocate? Because is this just a good idea poorly communicated and poorly executed? I have no dog in any of these fights. I'm just curious, because if Southeastern is getting a large pool of white applicants to come get educated there, and they're trying to equip, train, and educate pastors and ministry leaders for work in diverse areas, which you perfectly articulated in an argument, argued why that would be a wise decision to make. Why would you not want to try and, I guess, incentivize? I mean, it's the same way. It's instead of saying we're going to send people, so because we're going to send people, here's why we're going to pay for their college degree.
It's the prioritization of it. They're not saying, hey, we are setting aside resources for people who are specifically going towards unchurched and unreached areas. They're saying we're first going to filter everybody by race and gender.
I hear what you're saying.
And then we'll talk about evangelical.
You keep focusing on the going and the sending. I agree. All I'm asking is that, practically speaking, that's a hard thing to execute as an educator. So it's like, we'll pay you back after you deploy 6 years later. So what if instead they're saying there's a high likelihood that these ethnicities getting religious degrees to be pastors and ministry leaders are going to go back to their ethnic areas where we know we want them to, I'm agreeing with you. I'm just trying to.
I don't take any issue with the possible outcomes of this program, in the sense that I assume that even the recipients of these awards are, God-fearing, motivated, evangelists and teachers who want to fulfill the mission that God has laid on their heart. Okay, so let me just basic.
Oh yeah,
right.
I hear that.
The issue I have is that they have done two things. One, they've tipped their hand by creating a top-level racial filter from the outset. Okay? That, I think, once you've done that, you've told me that your priorities are misaligned. Okay?
Not just racial, gender too.
Even right. And so even if you are correct in terms of like your outcomes and these people go on to do other things, whoever is perpetrating this program has not constructed it in a way that is biblical. And that brings me to the second issue, which is they evoke spurious biblical support for doing this, which is to say that because the Great Commission applies to everybody and because the prophecy says people of all nations and tongues, therefore we have to manifest that in specific frames today, and we need to pursue that as a prerequisite criteria. So you're saying, okay, we'll first do this, and then within that, we will preach the gospel. It's like, no, you preach the gospel first in the most effective way that you can, and then understanding that you are not allowed to use the cultural and linguistic barriers that exist just practically in the world as an excuse not to reach those people. Do you see the difference?
But Jesus has met his white Christian quota, Tim. Like, so we don't need to have
The sovereignty of God has spoken.
Well, I see the difference, Tim, and that's why I was pulling on the thread of a poorly executed and
Yes.
communicated good idea.
I think
I
to
still not a
answer,
good idea because their idea has the wrong motive.
yeah,
Their
Right.
goal
We think.
is
Core.
to
Yeah, we're
promote
assuming,
diversity
right.
first.
We think.
If well, I don't.
Hold on, let me-
Here's the thing. Let me
Go ahead,
sorry,
Josh,
real
go
quick,
ahead.
Josh.
No,
And
go ahead.
just to answer this,
Go.
why I don't think that their whole purpose is to be reaching those, that are lost is because it doesn't seem it's like students of African descent, Asian descent. It's all descent, and then like
Oh, yeah,
first
that's true.
generation
It's true.
immigrants. What advantage do those people have to go like you? Okay, let's say for instance somebody goes from Africa, gets a degree in African descent, and his mission is to China.
Good luck.
What's their excuse now?
Well, even if
Like,
his
what are
mission
they
was
trying
the
to-
Congo.
Okay, hold on. I want to bring it. Hold on.
We gotta-
I want to bring it back to this
No, I mean-
because hold on. This is where I think the real breakdown is to answer Nick's question. I think is this a poorly executed good idea, or is it what I think we're more leaning towards? Is it more likely that it's a virtue signal, DEI scholarship kind of situation? And I think you can't ignore what we're coming out of and the general practice that we've seen across many organizations and churches and places, which is we need to reframe this because, hey, like, listen, there's a large portion of progressively oriented denominations within the church in America. But the mobilized and very vocal aspect of the concern, or let me put it this way, where the money's at from an organizational standpoint is with the conservative side of the house, generally speaking. And so I think this feels to me like a way to maintain a program that may have support from certain aspects of either their faculty, maybe the student body to some regard, but that is demonstrating a willingness to be in line with the political wind change of opinion towards, or I mean, I'd say the legal implications of the removal of explicit DEI programs. Because, yeah, I mean, if an organization like Southeastern was basically driving or trying to maintain or still drive with a heavy DEI, implementation, that opens that institution up to risk. So I mean, again, this is all speculation, okay?
Sure.
But from
it does seem like they're slapping Revelation.
that's
7:9
really it's
onto the
ham-handed. I mean, of all the passages and of all of the justification that could be provided,
Wait,
like,
can you not just use the Great Commission? That seems to me
That's
the
fine.
obvious one.
yeah, if
Right.
that
Using
was the
Grace
move,
Commission.
if that was the move,
28. We don't
Yeah.
need to go to the end.
Yeah.
The end where all the saved people that are
guys,
going
it's in
to be saved in
Revelation.
the world.
You can't argue with
That's good. No,
Revelation.
what?
It says so at the end. Okay, you can't add to or take away from.
Let's
You
go to
can't
the middle,
authoritative.
not the end, right?
And let me, because to Nick, your point, this is just one aspect of it, but let me kind of broaden the mentality a little bit. I found a Lifeway Research poll from 2022 of churchgoers, people who attend church at least monthly. And they were asked, or what they reported was 49%, half, say their church needs to become more ethnically diverse. Okay? And that number jumps up to 63% amongst younger attendees. Okay, now that's interesting. Okay? That presupposes, so, and let me back up. You have, I think, a low grade guilt that is basically intentionally fostered in all of your typical Protestant middle class white churches that say, hey, do you think the fact that there's not more minorities here reflects poorly on you? And do you really think you're fulfilling the gospel mandates that you have, given how many of you are white? That's the implication. And a lot of people, half of them, have basically internalized that completely.
It was explicit,
Meanwhile,
dude. That was
what's that?
explicit. I don't know how many churches I was in the States where from the
Oh,
pulpit
yeah.
or directly, like, hey, listen, we know, like, we've got lots of work to do. If we look around, like, and the pastor looks to his left
Right.
and
They
right,
do the self-flagellation.
like,
Oh, look how white we all are.
we know. And we're working on it, and so, get involved.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah,
So
it is.
Is the point of you expanding the lens here
That a
trying
lot
to
of people have a theological misunderstanding about what the diversity mandate within the local church is. And the reason I bring McGavran's work into that is to illustrate that from a strictly practical standpoint, and when I say practical, I mean in the sense of Paul saying, I become all things to all people that some might be saved. That's what we're called to do. We are called to strategize and be effective. You don't get to put provisos on what the right way to get people redeemed is, to bring them the gospel is. You don't get to say, well, if I'm not getting the proportional amount of all of these different ethnic groups, then that's not the
missing
right
the
way,
mark.
so some of you are just going to have to go to hell, right? Okay.
Right.
So the reason I bring in his work is to say that he's pointing out that the fact of the matter is, experientially, both from the failure of the alternative and the success of new strategies, is to recognize that we are bound to each other by the gospel once we're saved, but we also have a lot of very concrete human, relational, custom, tradition connections to each other that you can't imagine are expunged just because you now share an eternal destiny. And I love this quote from his book. What was it called? Understanding Church Growth. Christians must, of course, break contact with all idolatrous ceremonies and those binding them to the non-Christian religion, whether that be atheistic communism, animism, or some other system.
Transubstantiation.
But those...
Sorry.
But
This is about to be a great moment, Josh. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Tim, start over.
So you have to break contact with all idolatrous ceremonies, binding them to the non-Christian religion. Once this is talking about people converting, but those who guide them, the people who lead them to Christ and preach in their churches, but those who guide them would do well to insist that they redouble connections at all other points. Their churches, instead of dwelling on activities they cannot share with unbelievers, should look for those that they can share. A rejection of the deep sense of brotherhood must not be a part of their first step into Christianity. Educated Christians' constant emphasis should be, we are still with you. You are our people, bone of our bone. The differences that have come through other factors do not erase our essential oneness with you. And think about it. That's the end of the quote. Think about the impact of that. You have a better chance if you are not someone of a specifically missional and evangelical talent that allows you to navigate sort of the deft challenges of going and trying to reach a culture totally separate from you. Okay. If you're not one of those, and that's always going to be kind of a minority of people. Even look at the early church, not everybody was Paul and Barnabas. Okay. Most of the people who lived and died as Christians in the early church were just Christians in their own community. And they individually had the greatest capacity to reach other people within their community. Okay? Not to exclude anyone else, but to not load themselves with this artificial spurious obligation, which is an extremely modern idea that, well, it would sure, this is a great looking church, but it sure would be nicer if some of these people were a different color. It's
Right.
like, well, I reached the people that I could. I reached the people that were already bonded to me in some way, that I had access and opportunity to reach. And it's that exact kind of opportunity that misplaced theology that misprioritizes and over prioritizes diversity for its own sake, that would force people to eschew, like, do we really need to go minister to more white people, or whoever is like you? Because it's not just along racial lines. I really have to stress that there's plenty of people in your culture. I mean, Anderson, you were talking about how in Southern California, your culture was multicultural.
Yeah, there was I was a minority at my high school. I was a minority in my neighborhood. Most of my friends were Black and Hispanic, and I hung out with other Black and Hispanic conservatives, other Black and Hispanic Christians, and we shared the same value. And so that was our church. We had a multiple. Now there were disagreements, like everything, like all other things, but we were able to, in that deep sense of brotherhood. We ate at the same restaurants. We knew we called it the Ghettoplex, the movie theater you didn't want to go to, right? Like, we all had this community that we were part of, and it went beyond ethnic lines or racial lines, because we were part of the same community in that sense. It was, to your point, if I went to a church and there were a bunch of Mercedes or BMWs, and it would be hard for me as a where I grew up to kind of not feel like,
let me tell that story on camera, because I told that to you before we were rolling, and this was just a testimony I heard from a guy many years ago, and how he was saying it in church, and fortunately he and his wife were involved and saved and all of this stuff. And he was saying how, like, the first church they rolled up to after they got saved, and kind of just picking a church out of the Yellow Pages style thing, they pull into the parking lot, and they're surrounded by like BMWs and Mercedes and expensive cars, and they are just like, look at each other and like, do you want to be here? and they self-selected out. Okay, now that was, like, you could say, well, that was prejudicial and wrong. You can't just assume that because these people were richer than you that they would not have been a contributing and helpful church body to be a part of. But that doesn't change the fact that these two people, as brand new Christians, were sensitive to the differences and would have been loaded. And, like, if someone had shown up in that moment and said, it's wrong of you to decide not to associate with these people just because they're economically different. Like, okay, technically that's true, but why are you going to burden a brand new Christian with that? When there's...
Yeah. There's two things on this, right? One is this: cross-cultural ministry is a thing. Okay. I don't know how many people tried to plant churches in the Seattle area in the early 2000s, but it took Mark Driscoll and, the people there that started Mars Hill to create something that resonated with the culture, but that was distinctly Christian, right? It was approachable in as much as it could be, and therefore it resonated, and it's all explosive growth. When we moved to China to become missionaries, like when we were, we'll bleep out the country, but it doesn't really matter. When I moved, to Asia, our family was missionaries. Yeah. The whole thing there was, you don't go and start a church as a white guy. Well, one, because it's probably illegal depending on where you are, and two, it doesn't work. People have tried that. You can teach people, you can create discipleship opportunities, you can create new believers, but when you build a church, that is a manifestation of that community. And this gets to the bigger point. That book that you're citing, this Church Growth, what was that? What was the name of it again?
It's called Understanding Church Growth. It was written in 1970.
Understanding Church Growth. Great concept. But this is why people had trouble with this, because what were they doing? They were trying to grow these bodies outside of organic communities. And guess what?
Boom.
Yes.
That's where you hit the roadblock.
Yep.
And this gets back to something we've said lots and lots of times here, that church, a lot of the problems that we have in the West, in church, are problems of scale, because the American way is bigger, faster, stronger. Like, that's how we measure success. And so it's like, I know if I'm being effective for the gospel, if my church is growing exponentially. We're going into neighborhoods. I can go back to Mars Hill and point that out as an example. You know, it would have been great if he would have just had Ballard in downtown, you know, Seattle, but no, like we got to go to Portland and Olympia and all the way down into New Mexico, 18 campuses. Like, you're crossing cultural lines there, and you're trying to maintain a consistent, cohesive, you know, relatable community at each place. And at a certain point, you can do that if you take the model of like the Catholic Church, where you basically say, forget your own culture. This is how we're doing things now. And there's a level of like, exactly, which, you know, hey, listen, it's effective to an extent, but only if you have, you know, like eternal salvation, you know, gatekept, then you're good. But like, if you're preaching a priesthood of believers and a gospel of, you know, individual accountability, responsibility for growth and discipleship, it becomes very difficult to expect a community to become something that it's not. Because that community, and so this is the thing from my view, and like, what does this matter to, like, if you're listening to this, you're like, I'm like, what do I do with this? You know, how does this affect me, right? Like, here's what I would say is, you're not going to have these problems if you're building church community in your community. You're not going to have these problems because the people, like, well, I'll give you an example. All of us were a part of a house church in Lynchburg. And the way it started was, you know, when I moved to Lynchburg, I moved back for seminary, and I'm like, I have all these friends. And I'm going to this church where I see these people who aren't my friends. And then I come back over here, and then I hang out with my friends. And we talk about what God is doing in our lives, and what, you know, we worship together, we you know, pray, we share each other's burdens. But then we go to this other place for church. And what happened was, for a season, is this community of friends aligned those gatherings to, you know, growing in our faiths and in our families and being outwardly facing in our communities. And it worked. But that's what we see successfully, is that, like, when a church is in fact your community, when it is localized, when it is, you know, tied in, then you're not having to, it is what it is. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're not having to say, oh, well, we only hire these people, or we don't hire these people, or we only have these things, or we don't have that. You don't have to say that, because you can just look and be like, that's Jim. I work with him. This is Jane. She's my neighbor, and these are her kids. Like, it's not about, like, I don't have to create policies, and it just, it doesn't work. And so, like, I can understand where, you know, there's a level of policy and nuance that you have to engage with some of this when you talk about things like a seminary, right? Which do cover regional communities, right? Nations, like even some of them international, makes a lot of sense. But I think as this gets to the church, which is really, like, I think this just highlights that, but I think the real meat and potatoes of this conversation is in, you know, if you're listening to this and you're like, I have totally heard these conversations at my local church, then, like,
I think we all have.
Yeah, I think we all have. And so, like, my question is like, okay, you know, maybe the issue is that your church is growing too big and maybe needs to become two churches. Maybe you're looking at doing a church plant, a cross-cultural church plant, in which case the individuals who are going to be involved in that are equipped, are the right people who are from or who have some stake in that. I think that's the richness. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think that's the goodness of diversity and, you know, of I think intentional, deliberate, you know, planning with the concept of, like, you know, diversity in mind. I think it has more to do with cross-cultural ministry than it does, to your point, and from the article's point, I think what you were pointing out Tim, is, doing it just from some mistaken idea that like all aspects of kingdom life must reflect the global church when we stand before Jesus. I don't know if that tracks.
No. Well, and just from a historically practical standpoint, like, sure, the early church in Antioch was probably pretty cosmopolitan, just based on the history of the crossroads, of the geography of where that existed and the people and so on. And I'm sure God ordained all of that to establish his early church and spread it far and wide from an early stage. But that's a historical anomaly. Like, even the notion of diversity in the modern sense, like, most people in most places throughout the world would not have even had a point of reference if you tried to explain that to them. It's like, well, I'm Chinese, he's Chinese. What other what other
Right.
is there here for us to be inclusive? And so, like, when you see, even in Paul's letters, one of the things that you see come up in concrete terms, that's a division, has a lot more to do with like wealth, right? Because that's actually going to be something that
Yes.
actually exists
1 Corinthians
in
11.
basically every,
That's
don't give
stratification.
preference to, don't give
James
preference
says
to
that,
this
don't
or
give
that or
preference
whatever.
to the rich. Yeah.
And that's an important point. It's like, okay, if you choose, because it's two things. What I would like people to take away is, one, don't be guilted into building and having and enjoying a community of grace around you that is reflective of the culture that you were placed in. That's where you were born. It wasn't an accident. Everybody's identity was ordained
Well,
from the get-go.
And
so
Paul
don't
says
let
in Galatians not to, if you come into faith as a Gentile, don't try to become a Jew. If you become into the faith as a Jew, don't try to become a Gentile. Sorry, go ahead. I thought it was too good to pass up.
And so don't be guilted into like, oh gosh, my church is too white. I guess we're not really gospel centered because we're not attracting enough of, insert minority here. Like, absolve yourself of that, but at the same time, understand that there's absolutely no justification for exclusion. And if you have a call to go and reach groups and places, because there's lots of them that are not reached at all, if you have that call, do it strategically, such that you're not then trying to load those people with the burden that I have just lifted off of you by not feeling obligated that they should suddenly include a bunch of people that they don't really relate to in any concrete way.
This is a really important thing I want to hit here, because I know this is going to come up, but this is another piece. What we're talking about here is dragging this in when there's no demand signal. I want you to hear this very clearly.
Yeah.
If you have people who are not of your, who aren't from around where you're from, that become part of your community or seek to become part of your community, the Christian response is to welcome those people as brothers and sisters in Christ, right? And it is absolutely a sanctifying, unequivocally a sanctifying endeavor that we should sacrifice our discomfort in that capacity to welcome those who would seek to join or who would come to us for living water, come to the church to be pointed to Jesus. Like that is something that I have seen. I mean, that's historically, I think when a lot of people think about, socioeconomic or racial, divides in the church historically, that's what comes to a lot of people's minds, is this sort of gatekeeping, right? And that is not at all what we're discussing here, right? There is no excuse for that.
No.
What we're talking about is incentivizing.
Be hard on yourself because very few people choose to go and be part of cultural churches that are not culturally similar to their own background.
Nor should you change your culture. Nor should you. Should you strive to change what is good, if it's good and if it's organic and naturally a part of your culture. Nor should you change that to make yourself more appealing to a culture that is not yours. You should worship in the context of your community. I mean, these are...
Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah.
No, so in summary, the whole thread seems to be, from my vantage point, that we happen to find ourselves in a day, and we lived through a time where an overt and unnecessary burden and weight was placed onto the shoulders of Christians, and it was more of a check the box or you're not in correct alignment
Yeah.
of
Explicitly.
diversity explicitly. And we lived through that.
Yep.
So you might
Yeah.
be coming to this 10 years later and being like, I don't know what you boys are talking about. But because I'm telling God about this podcast, it's going to be around for 10 years and
That's right.
it's going to be
Inshallah.
here.
No, it's true. Preachers
But
indicted their
you're-
congregations from the pulpit for not being racially diverse enough.
So the beauty of what you're presenting is that when you don't put this unnecessary, unhelpful stumbling block in front of you, then the gospel gets to be on full display and Jesus gets all the glory in all the places he wants to be and places he wants to go. And to your
Right.
point, we're still called to all the nations. But Hughes, your point was perfect, where it's like, if you unnecessarily try to force this bad boy, it's all going to break.
It always
Right.
does.
And actually, what actually one of the things that can happen, one of the better case scenarios for that is that you end up creating a church ghettoification where it becomes its own microculture
Yep.
that now nobody is comfortable in, that's not already part of it, and will never grow because it no longer has anything sufficiently in common with the culture that it's surrounded by, where people are comfortable moving into it. And
Oh,
so
dude.
if you start
A perfect example of that is let's look at the progressive Christian denominations. Look at the Episcopalians. Look at the Methodists. Like
Oh,
they're not
yeah.
united.
look at the
on-
Episcopalians.
Look, they're not
Look at
united.
them.
They're not
Ah.
united by their view of the gospel. They're united by what they tolerate and allow in the context of, or what they've affirmed, like what these concepts are. They're not. It's not built on an organic, like natural, like community that exists there. It's in all of their identity. They've created an identity of the other, and that they are the other accommodating church. And you see that.
Right.
You drive through. Yeah, I bet if you're listening to this, drive through your town, especially if you're in the southeast, or maybe not too far southeast, but if you're like Virginia, just kidding, pretty much anywhere. You drive through town, you know exactly which church I'm talking about, because that is the distinctive feature. Is what they've got that banner
The
right out
rainbow
front,
flag right? on
right?
the side of
It's
it, yeah.
right there, and it's like, hey, we're that church. Like
Yeah,
that becomes the intrinsic identity, and I feel like that's what this has been, is that it is that culture of pick a thing for its sake, and that's not what community is. And I would say the same thing is true about, like, you can have, actually, here's a good parallel. It's like topical sermons versus good exegesis. All right, church should be,
Was that a biased framing? Would you say?
yeah, right. It's a
topical sermons versus the good sermons.
they're good sermons. That's exactly what I'm getting at. I don't even have to say it because you already know. Yeah, a good church is line by line through your community. It's Jim from down the road. It's so and so from wherever. Like it is a deliberate and linear, like, breakdown of who's in your community, right? A topical sermon is a cherry picked amalgamation to drive home a singular point, right? We built the team.
A pre-chosen point.
A pre-chosen point. I have decided that this will be a church of comfort for everyone and growth for no one. And so therefore,
Exactly what you see. If you want to go cherry pick a bunch of
That's it.
verses and passages to promote diversity, you can find them.
you can do it.
But that doesn't make those things
it's got no
actually
power.
Scriptural.
It's got no power.
So I wanted to point something out that I thought was really interesting, because as you introduce this concept of the homogeneous unity principle, or
Homogeneous unit principle.
homogeneous unit principle, as you introduced this particular concept, it was fascinating to me, because the concept of it I could already see is completely misaligned, and not the concept by other people that disagree with it. They don't understand it. And for proof of this, I found an article critiquing it. And what's interesting in this article is I found that they were using a church where I grew up, that was 5 minutes from my house. They used that church, Rialto, California. There's this church called Sunrise. They use this church as an example of why.
Dude, the number of churches in California called Sunrise.
Oh, I know, right? Well, I think
should
what
do an
they
episode on church
missed the
names.
point.
Ooh,
So they're trying to make the
should.
point that, well, it's good to have diversity in the church, and that's what look at all the growth that we've had. But they kind of shot themselves in the foot because they're saying that they planted in 1957, but then their demographics changed from a white population to now it's a lot more Hispanic and Black and Asian, and a lot more people in that area. That was their community. So what did they do? They made an intentional choice to diversify the leadership, and there was a lot of people that came. And let me just make the point here. They're trying to say, well, because they weren't homogenous, because of the different ethnicities of the people in their community, it brought growth. But I would argue, like, that's the exact point of homogenous unit principle, is that you are reaching the people in your community
Yes.
that are homogenous. Just because they're a different race doesn't mean they're not
Yeah.
homogenous.
Yeah, that
It's
would be
not.
bad.
And that's and
It
I
would be
can tell
bad
you,
to do it
I
the
went
other
to
way.
that church a couple of times, and it was not, well, okay, we're going to have these completely different racial, aspects of our church. It was in complete unity. And that's one of the things that I'm like looking at but here's the problem that I have. When they asked the congregation, what do you love about our church? They said something, they go to the church because of the multicultural outreach, or because we're reaching the community. That I was invited by a friend, and everything is multicultural aspect about it. And while that's all well and good, you're reaching multicultural people because all
That's an
nations are to come to Jesus.
uncomfortable answer
But
to
you're
give when someone asks you why you like your church, frankly.
right, exactly. But you're really not. I mean, if anybody else has grown up in a multicultural area, you understand it's not really too much multicultural. There are
Right.
some
Well, and
cultural
in the
aspects,
same
but
way
like when
that
you're
you
in a
can-
community and a brotherhood, you're able to have a community
Right.
and a brotherhood of people that are of different ethnic backgrounds.
Yeah.
But you have the same mind,
Listen,
the same experiences.
y-
If I were to say, hey, I'm from the IE, right, the Inland Empire, people would be like, oh yeah, I know. I know
Right,
where that
'cause
kind
you're
of
the
place is, right? Like, I mean,
same culture.
it doesn't matter what race, color, or creed you are. You
Right.
have this unity.
Culture
Right.
doesn't
Right,
have
and
to mean color.
it's so funny.
Exactly. And that's the thing, right? Like that would be bad. If I went somewhere like that and I looked up and I saw that, all of the leadership were Korean, I would be I'm confused, but if it's, but
Josh,
like,
wasn't-
go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry. I was going to say, in Maryland, when we were in Maryland, there was a church that had a Korean pastor that ended up kind of becoming the lead pastor, and we had a whole lot more Koreans come into the church. But guess what? There's a huge Korean culture in
Huge population. Yeah.
and it was fine, and there was no like division on the
No.
ethnic or the cultural aspect, because they were all going
Because
to
it was representative, and that's what you
University
would
of Maryland.
have,
Like,
right?
I mean,
That's the
like,
point.
Everybody was the same area.
Like that's the point. This is all we're trying to say, is that, like, really when we look at this, what it comes down to is this: like, there is diversity in the body of Christ, and there's diversity in churches. Matt Wilmington, TRBC, he said, hey, God's bride it's old, it's young, it's black, it's white, it's Asian. Like the body of Christ is diverse because God created diverse people. Your church does not have to be something that is not reflective of where it comes from. And I mean that even beyond just even race or political lines or anything like that. I mean, even just stylistically. I mean, even, when I was we were growing up, or if you were in the Southeast, like, Nick and I were, or Maryland, I guess we'll call it that. It's borderline, literally.
It's below the
It's
Mason-Dixon
literally
line. It's part
borderline.
of the South.
But the general mentality, like the big cultural feud in the churches then was like, dude, do we have a contemporary service or a traditional service? Like, I mean, there are a lot of churches even to this day, but especially when I was growing up, many of you too probably, where your church had two communities in it. There's a traditional community,
The old and the, yeah.
and
Early
there's
service and later service.
that's
and
it.
That
You
was
got
where
the-
the two
that was
different
it. You got hymns in the morning and drum sets in the evening, and never
We do
the
that
two
too.
shall meet.
Yep. We
And
do that
that's-
too. I love it.
And that was okay. And so that's the thing. It's like, how can we apply common sense in this context, but not in the other? And, this is really where I argue this. It's just, we got to get away from this big box Christianity. Like, you want to talk about, we talked last week and the week before about, revival and a great awakening. I want to see house churches popping up. I want to see, people coming into big box Christianity and going like, I'm not really getting the answers or the connection or the depth. I want to see families and Christians bringing people into their homes.
Truthfully, I think even there you're painting with too broad a brush.
I know.
Because here's why, and I'll bring it back to the actual topic of discussion. You are casting a vision for a particular kind of church that there is nothing wrong with. Personally,
wholly disagree with
it's
you.
not I know.
Definitively disagree. I'll tolerate it because we're sinful and broken people. And you're right. It is a cultural norm, but it is not. It is.
Right,
it
but
is
you're
100% a barrier.
Exactly,
no,
you're doing exactly what I'm saying you shouldn't do. You're saying, hey, if you want to be a true church, you need to manifest that church in ways that I think
that's
are
not what I'm saying.
correct.
No,
I didn't get.
I'm
that.
not.
I think he was just saying.
If you want to be part of a true church, you've got to deal with all of
I'm
these
saying
other
I want to
cultural
see
change,
new
whole
Christians.
framework of how you do church.
I want to see new Christians come into Christianity without the baggage that we have. I hate
just say
the
I
fact.
want to see new Christians.
I want that too. Yes, but I want
new Christians
I have to go
enter
further than
into a
that.
genuine community.
Yes, I have to go further because I have a responsibility to do that because that's the difference, right? I have a responsibility, as do we all. But like specifically, I can't sit here and say with a straight face that like this one way, the thing that we talk about that is culturally relevant, and this is important. This is something we hadn't talked about yet, so we're getting ready to pivot.
Pull up though.
Your
It
culture
might be a different episode.
No, yeah, we might. But listen, we're going to talk about this. But culture is good. But remember, culture is downstream from worldview. We go to first principles. If there's stuff in your culture that's wrong, i.e., like look at Santeria in Catholicism. It's just like, oh, well, it's like they're redeeming the witchcraft and stuff, and I'm like, it's still witchcraft.
Have
like
a crystal ball.
Yeah, that's a great song. I'm just kidding. But
It is not.
well, I know it's a horrible song, actually. Don't ever listen to that. Sublime's dead to me. I'm just kidding. Anyway,
Look,
but let me bring it to my point. Big box Christianity, and what I mean by that is mega churches. And what most of us, if you grew up in the church, a lot of us grew up in. I'm not saying
cut off for the size of a mega church.
Hold on.
That's a whole nother
let
episode.
him make his point.
All I'm saying is,
well,
and that's why I'm not saying we can't have it. But here's
the behind the paywall.
Yeah. What I'm saying is where the whole point that we're getting at can be addressed if Christians would disciple and worship and grow in organic community. And that's what I'm getting at. So like if that looks like, a really rich and robust small group with a big corporate worship setting and that stuff, I'm okay with that. That meets the bill. We can talk about that later. But what I'm getting at is that's the thing. I want neighbors bringing in people and having genuine relationship, being known, having that. Like I don't want people to walk into, a giant worship service and be like, so this is it, huh? Like, so this is what we do here, and
right. So with
go
that,
ahead.
that's the point made.
Or yourself with extraneous, superficial provisos. They're like, well, this is what we do here. And understand when your culture and your community has failed to begin reaching more people.
That's right.
Where maybe a church plant is now appropriate. Maybe,
yeah.
And that's a biblical model, is for larger established churches who have, slowed their growth for any number of reasons, to sponsor and support other churches in an intentional way.
Yeah.
And you don't have to sit there and tick off a bunch of, HR boxes to feel like you are properly executing. Because the fact is, most people are not going to make disciples of all nations. Most people are just going to make a few disciples.
Dude, I'll take that. I'll take that. Can we get one?
Yeah.
Can I get one?
That's right.
Can I
Yeah.
get a one for one?
I think the ultimate, and this is what I'll kind of like bring it down to one question to ask people that are like, well, I think that multiculturalism is something that is part of the church, and we see it in the Bible and all these things. Here's the reality.
You're wrong.
Ask yourself this question. What other church other than the American church has the burden to be multicultural?
Oh, got him.
There is no other church. There's Eastern church in other countries. There is no guilt trip to say, oh, well, you don't have this amount of, check the box of your HR,
Or non-white
team.
churches inside of America. Like,
Yeah.
Oh yeah, even non-white churches inside of America, there isn't a guilt like, oh, that Korean church doesn't have enough whites or it doesn't have enough blacks.
no,
I mean, it's
no.
not. We're not the Power Rangers, right? Like we're not gonna try to
And some of the
form this.
consequence of that is that churches do have a life cycle as an organization, and that's okay too. All right, your goal is not to maintain one specific building with one, hereditary church body throughout the ages.
Again,
if that happens, fine. You
looking at
don't
you.
have to have an expiration date. But what?
Nothing. I was like, again, looking at you, Catholics.
Yeah.
It's either the Catholics or the
that
Calvinists.
does mean that the church will evolve even as new generations choose to make communities for themselves. And like a big thing for my wife and I is making sure that the church we go to is a constructive community for our kids. I actually prioritize their
100%.
comfort and satisfaction and their edification in the gospel higher than my own.
Yeah.
If it were just me or just me and my wife, I might choose a different church, but my priorities are a little bit different there. And that's another thing that's okay. It's okay to choose churches based on those desires. It's okay to make churches based on those things because again, your goal is to save who you can. Really? You're going to argue with me on
Yes,
that?
I am. I agree with your premise, but okay, I know what you're saying. I just felt you were drifting a little bit into.
I am trying to relieve people of the guilt.
I know,
of
but
being
the
told that
balance.
their church has to be just such a way before they're allowed to like it.
Yes, I
they're
agree with that.
allowed-
Les, I agree with that. I think the consumerism, again, I think the two sides of this coin are exactly what you're getting at, which is, one is there's a guilt of, we're doing church wrong. Maybe I shouldn't be at this church because it doesn't look the way that I've been told,
Yeah.
It should, right? But then there's the other side of that coin, which is consumerism, which I think is the rampant cancer of the church in the West.
And I'm not talking about what you get out of it. I'm talking about finding a church body that you can be intimately involved with and build strong
community.
relationships and contribute to. And that is going to be easiest within a subset of the larger culture that you're a part of. And that's just true. And that's okay.
Yeah, I agree.
When I went on deployment and we poured it into Singapore, I went to an American bar and had a, really weird meaty burger that didn't taste American, but it was an American bar that I went and I talked to other Americans.
But he didn't go to a
Singapore?
church. I thought you were going to say a Singaporean church, and I was going to be like, man, I'm so proud of you. But no, he went to a bar, folks, and he got a burger.
Bar.
There are a lot of churches in
You need to find his
Singapore.
community.
That's
I
right.
had
I
a
know.
great Korean barbecue in Singapore. It was amazing.
Dude, I love Singapore. If you ever been to the Raffles Hotel in Singapore, man, super cool. Super cool. Anyway, if you stuck with us this long, folks, what do you think?
This is a perfect time for tithes and offerings.
Yeah, we don't do that here.
Leave us your
And with that,
shares, your likes.
this is
your
the time
subscribe.
of
We're
tithes and
honored for you
offering.
being here today.
Hey,
This is our.
You need to turn that down. It's too hot.
It's really loud. Yeah.
sorry, wait,
You need to bring that down like 3 whole levels.
Although that's a good bit. I still think it's a good bit.
All right, there we go.
There we go.
It's
Is that better?
That's much better.
All right.
I can hear myself
Pay us
think.
your tithes and offerings with a
No,
subscription.
stop saying it.
We found out this week that Google blocks any faith content, and we have been shadow blocked and banned.
We have.
Share our channel if you want to help us grow.
That's absolutely right. We didn't hear from any of you guys. We want to know, like, are you team Patreon? What's going on? Like, you got any suggestions?
Yeah.
Let us know.
Well, yeah, we got like what 28 views on our last video.
Bro,
coming
we've
down
grown
from-
we've grown more in the last 2 weeks than we did in the last 6 months.
Yeah,
That's
Even more.
what shadow banning looks like. But if you're here, of the new folks that are, we really are glad you're here. And yeah, stick with us. Yeah.
Stick with us if you're of our culture, though.
Otherwise, get off my lawn.
Oh my God.
Gaslight us.
Gaslight us. We know you want to talk about receipts. I got human history and Western civilization. What do you have? 20 years of dumpster fires, purple hair. People who don't know which bathroom to go into. Get off my lawn.